Hi, I'm Jim. Welcome to the Unbound Performance Podcast, where we explore the world of sports and performance mindset training.
And I'm Caroline. Each week we talk about the strategies, habits, and mental framework that help us to excel. Let's get into today's episode. In college, I dropped a lot of on the court, loud ones. It still is my exclamation of choice.
It's got a certain
it works.
pop to it.
Yep, sure does. Anyway.
Ready to jump?
I'm ready to jump, man.
All right, let's go all inner game. I did want to segue a little bit back from the last chapter. We talked about judgment and the importance of removing judgment from the learning process, performance process. That self one, it desires approval. That's why, in this sense, even compliments are like a form of manipulation, really. And
reverse psychology kind of deal.
It still leaves the person seeking approval, and then it allows you to obviously judge anything that doesn't get
that reaction,
approval.
100%.
So obviously it's much more socially acceptable to dish out compliments, but it still leaves the receiver of said compliments chasing that approval, which makes it impossible.
It sets a bar in a way for that person to either expect to continue getting that if they swing the same swing or set the same good set. And if they didn't say it that time, you're going to start wondering, well, what was different about that one?
Absolutely.
And that's hard on anyone,
and
especially
maybe they won't
athletes.
Even wonder. They'll just go right to, well, that must have sucked.
That must have sucked. Right.
So I think that
just not the headspace we're seeking.
No. So if we spend any time in an event where we're seeking positive affirmation or whatever, it's just impossible not to. You're not going to just be able to judge all in the positive and the good sense. That's just not how this works. We want to get out of the judging business altogether. If, for peak performance, playing in a flow state or the zone or however you want to phrase it, there is no judging taking place, good or bad. There is just performing. I think from a coaching standpoint, I've watched plenty where the coaches are always saying something good, and I'm sure all the parents watching think that's awesome and that's the best coach ever.
Our coach is so positive all the time. It's so great for the kids.
Yes. Which, it's not psychologically harmful or anything, so that's good. But in terms of, and, maybe when kids are 10 and 11 or whatever, they're not accessing the flow state generally.
And they probably don't need to at that age.
Well, if they're allowed to just play freely and have fun, they'll kind of be in it.
Right.
And
unknowingly too.
Yes. But I do think even that can distract younger kids, where they start almost needing that constant stroking.
Yeah.
And
the kids who always look to their parents after every,
or
to the coach or wherever they are used to receiving that affirmation.
Yep.
You think about a kid whose parent is always critiquing them at home and coming home and fixing that error that you made in practice and taking over that. We've talked about the overlap of coach and parent roles.
Yep.
If that's the role that the parent tries to assume, then that kid during game now has the coach. They've got their teammates, they've got themselves, they've got their parent, and you look over and parents making one bad face. Even if it's not a bad face of the kid, if they're used to seeing you make faces as a reaction to your actions, they could be making a bad face at some guy who's walking around naked at the end of the hall. I don't, you know what I'm saying.
We can edit that out, right?
My first example was someone throwing up or something, just making seeing something strange unrelated to the sport, and making a weird face. Is that better? But the kids used to seeking the parents looking at their face or their reactions and assuming that that's geared towards them, and that's just
and that's
no longer an affirmation.
Yeah, seeking approval. That's not the mindset we want to have when it comes to performing. If we have hopes of performing at our best, so the first inner skill to be developed in inner game is that of non-judgmental awareness. We have to be aware that we are judging, and then we have to flip it so that we're sucking judgment out of our process. And then that goes to the next skill to learn. It's the chapter 4, let it happen. And that's where you're not forcing it, trying it, grinding. It's like if you try to hit a ball harder, and I'm going to grit my teeth, and
then you just hit it worser,
and you don't hit it as hard.
Right.
Because you create all this tension and there's a lack of fluidity and kind of proper rhythmic sequencing.
If you're smaller muscles that are jaw clenched, head clenched, hands clenched, your bigger muscles don't work the way that they're supposed to work, which are going to be the ones that give you the power. Like, it's just those, I mean, whether it's hitting a ball hard or jumping high or anything where the rest of your body is not functioning in its flow state or its comfort state, you can't make things, they don't work independently of one another.
No, and that's, it goes back to, mind body unity. Like, all those thoughts touch all these cells in your body, and there is no separation. So if you're constantly trying harder, that just means you're more tense, you're stiffer, and you're not in a peak performance state. That's just how it goes. But we are wired to want to just try harder.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of the feedback we get when it comes.
I was going to say, what's your thought on, as a parent or as a coach, maybe more parenting, we'll stick with that, because from a young age it's the parents' job, or parents who do this maybe is the better way to put it. But the parents who encourage their kid to try harder in school, try harder, like, we use that phrase of try harder. It's always meant, I'm sure, with positive intent, but I think if you're used to that try harder, is that your default state when things are going wrong and you don't really know how to try harder? Like, what do you have, I mean, there may be zero correlation.
I'm going to guess what they really mean when they say something like that is, maybe you should put in a few more hours of study
more, yeah.
Prepare more.
Right. But when you do the blanket try harder.
Yeah, I mean, it is open-ended and kind of amorphous. But I think in that sense, what is being implied or assumed is that they'll put more time in.
You didn't take the steps
systematically.
You need to do.
Yeah. Like, you could have told me in high school to try harder on my schoolwork. I would have known exactly what that meant. Like, it meant, well, I should probably do my homework and study for tests and things like that. But
that's a high schooler, yeah. But like my 7-year-old, when I say try, she doesn't always know what the steps are to try harder. So I think it's important to be more specific when it comes to those.
For sure, because
suggestions.
They have
high school. You know better.
I think that's where getting to the point where self one trusts self two. I know one of the things I like in the beginning of this chapter, he talks about how amazing our body is in terms of what it can do without thinking. It's on autopilot. All the things that it does, and we take for granted, understandably so. But if you pause and reflect on that, you should come to the conclusion that this body I've got is pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
And that kind of flows right into the next. So it's okay to trust it with hitting a tennis ball or a golf ball, or
just to breathe and keep us alive.
Yeah. Showing some respect for all of that. That is kind of like a springboard for Gallwey into the whole talking self one into trusting self two as a natural learner, a natural performer, rather than trying to dominate, dictate, control. Because if you were wholly reliant on self one for everything, even like walking upstairs to come into this room, to open the door, to turn on the lights, like, you'd go nuts and you would probably just want to sit there, or you'd be so exhausted.
Like you said, just think, if I have to actively think to myself, like, okay, lift my arm, grab this paper, like, that's not the way we function. We just do it without having to have all that background noise and direction from ourselves, which, like, exactly what you're saying, just proves that our bodies can do those things. It doesn't have to be everyday tasks like breathing and your heart beating and walking up the stairs. Like, it can be in your sport, in whatever.
Well, the same way we learn to walk upstairs and come in this room, open the door, close the door, turn the lights on.
Without thinking.
You can learn that and apply that, if you're performing an athletic activity or piano recital or whatever.
I think we attach that win-loss aspect to a sport. And suddenly, that's where it kicks in.
And that's where we get distracted by results, outcomes, and we've tied our identity and worth to those. That's when pressure goes up. We start thinking self one does not trust self two. We can't leave this to chance, and then you're stuck in a very tough situation to perform well. And if you listen to anybody who does anything really well, and you ask, what was your best ever dance recital performance? Was it one where you were just unconscious and you flowed and didn't think?
Yeah.
You just felt it? Well, that's always what it is. Like, it's never going to be one. I remember being in total control of every step I took, and my brain just told my body what to do on every turn, every time I raised my arms. No, nobody ever says stuff like that. So we have to get to the point where we can trust self to do its job. And that is where like we have to reframe, take a hard look at this, but it does not come by constant haranguing, whether it's in our own mind, self one to self two, it's from an outside source, like a coach or a parent. It just guarantees that the learning process and the peak performance will be stunted.
Yeah.
There's no getting around it. And yet, I read this book a while ago and totally believe in it. Even I catch myself. I was given a lesson the other day and I was like, because I was wanting to praise good things. And, well, no, I'm just getting in the way. But the young man I was giving a lesson to, he's super analytical. So I was really getting in the way because he's already going to want to think his way through this. And even the way I phrase, like, think about like where you want your left foot to be. Like, no, don't think about it. Like, just feel it. Just be aware of it, So you have to be really intentional with your wording and then allow space for them to learn and grow, which means you don't talk all the time. And I really try. I know throughout the lesson I was saying, okay, next 10 balls, I'm not going to say anything. You just do it. Right. Then I have to control myself, because I want to say something. But do I want the credit?
Well, I think too, when you're in the coaching situation, maybe even more specifically in a private lesson where it's truly one-on-one, like they are here for you in your instruction, to want to praise the good ones because you're here to give them the instruction to hopefully make them better. And so you almost, and I think this is where that sort of self-serving ego side of coaching comes in, is you really want to, you want to praise the kid, like, great job, that was exactly what you came here to achieve. But you also want to, I think, subconsciously affirm that the direction you gave them was the right thing. I think also, speaking of wordsmithing a little bit, early on when you and I first started doing this, and we, like, the phrase, like, if your identity of self-worth is tied up in whether or not you make this shot. I think initially I thought, well, whose like whole identity is tied up in making that one shot? Well, I don't think it's so much that me, Carolyn, as a person for my entire life is wrapped up in that one single play, or every time I have every time I'm involved in a play on the court. But I think if you allow yourself in that moment, I think I'm separating when you go through the process of your core values. What's your purpose?
That does help you put in perspective those shots.
Correct. Yes, I think the way we phrase it when we're talking on this podcast most often is, if your identity and self-worth is tied up in scoring that point, which maybe suggests that we think that their entire identity and self-worth is tied up in that, when I don't think it's necessarily that your entire self-worth and identity is tied up in it. Like, I don't think that if you ask that kid to write their missions or their purpose statement, it would include, like, my purpose is to score points. But I do think in that moment, if you feel that your worth in general to whoever it is that's judging that, whether it's yourself or your coaches or your teammates, I think I'm separating, like, your own personal self-worth and identity in the world versus that outside perception of what it is, and that getting muddied a little bit.
Well, if we attach our identity to performance outcomes, we're in trouble. And
maybe that's the better way to put it, is that I think when we say it often, it's if you're tied up in that one shot being your identity,
right?
When really the language is like as a whole, any type of performance outcome.
Yes, for sure.
Sorry, I just that kind of clicked with me last night, and I was like, oh, maybe I'm not the only one who was thinking through that, being more specific and like single-sided than just the big picture of performance in general.
That's why it's important, like when we talked to the players last night, thinking about all the other things you bring to your team or to your community or whatever, besides a performance outcome that can help your team perform well, that have nothing to do with things you can't control. And outcomes tend to be one of those things. I mean, obviously you have some impact on them, but not ultimate control. And if you recognize the value of having good, like, moral performance character, as well as kind of a skill set performance character, then if you're cool with, all right, these things I can control being on time. I can control how hard I'm working. I can control what comes out of my mouth.
Encouraging my teammates.
So if I settle in to that, we can live with the outcomes, and whether they're exactly what we want or not. He goes into actually programming for results. Like, if you want to make changes, we have to get used to literally programming ourselves to react, respond, view all this differently than we do. Because right now, pretty much our entire training and performance lives are dominated by self-one and that judgmental mentality, and not just from like an evil malevolence kind of judging. It's just it never works out for us if we're going to spend all this time and effort evaluating,
analyzing every single thing.
Yes, and so learning the importance of kind of reprogramming, and we do that. Like he uses these words constantly in it: observe, feel, see. That's how this happens. Like when I try to show, like the young man I had a lesson with Sunday, I sent him video of like the 20 most awesome attackers in the world. You know, they were crazy. And having them just see that and absorb that and kind of then increase awareness and feel for what they're doing. That's how we learn physical.
You want to experience
skills.
it, not do it.
Yes, that's a really good way to put it, actually.
Thanks.
That's perfect. If we are kind of embodying it or however, you want to, then there is no judging. We don't have time or space to judge. We're just in it.
Yeah.
Then you kind of take the result. Like if I'm, whatever, I'll just use a tennis one. If I'm trying to put more topspin on my forehand, I just kind of feel that, see where I want the ball to go. And then I just notice, like, okay, where did it go? Okay, it went there. Yep. So kind of from an emotionally detached, rather than a, string of expletives and I throw my racket because it didn't go where I wanted it to go.
It's like I was really good at serving short balls, but like I could never tell someone how I know how to make my, like, right? Like that's a very difficult, right. I think I could still do it today. I mean, strength-wise, I don't know if I can get the ball over the net, but like as far as it's sad. I mean, I can't. I know I can.
That's good.
But it's one of those things that if you think about, I mean, there are certain skills you can break down, but there are also some things that you just have to feel and know how to make your body do it. And I can tell you, I think that the fact that there's not necessarily words to explain how I can serve a short two ball that way, I mean, just proves that it is a mind-body feel. I just had to envision that ball going there, and my body took care of how to make it go there.
And that's the chapter after this is like has some cues on different strokes in the tennis game, which we are going to skip because whatever, this isn't a tennis podcast. Yeah. But there are, like, he tells you some things, like, so we're not saying there's no instruction involved.
Definitely.
However, I think the way we instruct should be much more about showing so that they can absorb, be aware, and feel. Well, there is no way that I can just sit here and bark out orders to someone. I mean, I remember I was working with this little girl earlier and wanted to learn how to overhand serve. She's young and little. And I wasn't just standing there, okay, now do this, now do this. Like, showed it, let her do it a lot without me barking out orders. Yep. And I wanted her to feel free and that this was her thing. It was her experience. It was her volleyball life. And by the end of the first lesson, we got the ball over the net. Like, she got the ball over the net. I didn't do anything. And considering she was really small and young, I was, wow, that's something. When I talked to her mom, she's playing club volleyball now. She's just ripping serves all over the place, and she's still young and
small.
Well, but sometimes a person has to believe, see it can happen, see they can do it, and then off they go. And that's why I was really hoping, like crazy, by that lesson it would happen. Because it would just kind of accelerate her.
Well, it's like you and I talked about on the way home last night. Is I think people are afraid or feel embarrassed to believe that they could be great. Like, I think we think that people, these Michael Jordan and are just an enigma, and then I could never be that. And why the hell not? Why the hell not even at least strive? Maybe you won't end up being Michael Jordan. I mean, no one has been yet. But like to think that there's not a chance that you could do that is just going to be what limits you from that effort.
Well,
like if you just said there, hey, you're pretty small and
you're going to be your best.
You're not going to do it, right?
And that's, if
all
you can get to that, man, that you'll shoot right past a lot of people who may have more gifts or whatever. Because I mean, whatever, I don't know that many people who get to the point where they're as good as they can possibly be. And if they did it, they're pretty freaking transcendent.
Right.
So I think if that whole, like, I'm trying to be the next Michael Jordan, and if I'm not, then I failed.
Right.
Well, that's crazy. Like, even
insane goal to begin with.
You can be like Kobe Bryant, and
that's failure.
Okay, like,
right.
But but I know I watched this Clint Hurdle video today. He used to be the manager for the Rockies and the Pirates. He played for the Royals. He was talking about there's either like winning or learning, and that was if you can learn and take a couple of things away from the next.
Yeah.
All right, but that's a healthier way to approach all this, and it's a non-judgmental way to approach all this rather than to walk around. I failed. We lost. I'm a loser.
I suck.
And I mean, I remember being a young, savage coach, and I would say things that were like, that wasn't helpful. Like, well, you are what you do. Guess what? Like, if you lose all the time, you know what that means. We can't run from that. I don't know how helpful that was necessarily.
Bunch of losers.
Yeah. I meant well. But the whole idea of like being in a zone or flow state or kind of peak performance state, or ideal performance state, it does not come from that judgmental place, whether it's from ourselves or our parents or coaches adding to what we're already saying. So being able to detach, that doesn't mean you don't care when we say detach. Sometimes that's like if we describe someone as detached, that'll mean they're aloof and they don't give a crap. No, like that's not the point, but it does mean we're not just swimming in the emotion of that moment and letting it rock us. So he moves to the next thing, programming for form, and that's all about like freeing ourselves from like an emotional attachment to what we're doing, and then just being aware and seeing, like literally, like look, see, and then just feel and be aware. I mean, he has all these examples in the book where he's working with like a group of women, and when they aren't thinking about like we have to hit 15 balls in, they're not thinking about that. They're just trying to hit the ball well. They hit them in.
Yeah.
But when it's we have to hit these in, that's when things get tighter. We get stiffer. We feel like something really on the line. I'm a crap tennis player if I can't do this. Then we're just not going to play well.
Yeah.
And
if you
that's in a practice.
Right. Well, that's where I was headed. When you were saying like you have to hit 15 in, even just the direction of like serve 15 good balls versus serve 15 balls in are two very different. As an athlete, someone says you have to serve the next 15 balls in this zone 15 in a row. That's a whole higher pressure situation than serve 15 of your best serves.
Oh,
even that.
Yeah.
Or serve 15 good balls. Like however you word it. And like ultimately in my mind as a coach, like my goal for that athlete is the same. I want them to serve 15 in a row in the court. But you add that layer of pressure of like or else. And you don't even have to say or else. You don't even have to say or else you're running. Like I think athletes are already going to have that like, okay, if I don't achieve the goal, then that's bad.
Yeah, I failed.
And the second you set an expectation of a standard of 15 in a row in, that suggests that that's the bar, and if you're below it, then that's failure.
Right. Never mind. Like, I mean, I did this all the time. 15 in a row in, we'll run for every one we don't get to 15.
God, yes.
And I think you do have to find ways to simulate pressure in practice so that they learn how to effectively deal with pressure.
100%.
I know the running thing, I moved away from like a performance-related punishment on that to just effort.
Yeah.
Like, it would be like if we're not going for balls or whatever, then we're going to run.
Yeah.
And guess what? If we're always going, we'll never be running. For whatever reason, kids don't like running.
Well, I mean, I told you the post-game once in college the next morning.
Oh, yeah.
We had to run. And by the third basketball suicide at 5 a.m., like we got the point, right?
Yeah.
And not only was that not effective just on your bodies after a 2-game weekend, you can't undo what's been done. But also, for the next, that didn't teach us, like, how to correct it going forward. That just taught us going forward, like, every error we make in a game, that's like, are we going to run tomorrow?
It's drowning in judgment.
Yeah.
And it's not freeing.
It did nothing to make us make less errors and did way more to make us, like, separate us from that flow state and just doing what needs to get done in fear of an error of, at the end of the game, if we lose, are we going to run for every...
Well, yeah. And that's...
not going to breed a good outcome there.
We're not going to program ourselves in any way that's going to produce a peak performance. His third thing on this is programming for identity. So he says, what I'm mainly interested in is that you adapt professional mannerisms and that you swing your racket with supreme self-assurance. Above all, your face must express no self-doubt. He says that after he has someone like role play, and he tells the person, okay, we're making a TV show. Your job is to look like a professional tennis player. And don't worry, like, we're not going to film where the balls go. We just want you to look like a professional tennis player. We'll take care of that. So you don't have to worry about the outcomes. Then he moves into, okay, now that's how you should be playing. And that kind of adopting of an identity of self-assurance.
What's that? I mean, cliche is like fake it till you make it kind of idea. I think that's the wording of that maybe isn't as good as what you're talking about, but it is that idea of like if you can strap yourself up with this really high confidence level, even if it's not what you think you actually produce. That example right there of the pretend like you look you're a professional,
right?
And my guess would be that if they actually looked at the actual outcomes of each of those person's swings, maybe they weren't quite ready for the TV show, but they were probably not bad.
Well, they were. That was the hack. Like, you're going to play better.
You're going to play better.
And so I know some people love the idea of fake it till you make it. Some people don't. I think there is definitely something to the way you carry yourself. And, you know, I mentioned this before, like Tony Robbins, when he talks about just the difference when your chin is up, your shoulders are back as you walk down the street versus down, shoulder slump. Like, the one way, like, it's impossible to, like, feel depressed. Never mind, you know, perform horribly. It gives you a chance to kind of perform the way you hope to perform. And so this whole chapter, in the one prior where we learned the importance of letting go of judgments, the art of programming images, and then letting them happen. Like, those are, like, in his words, three of the basic skills for, like, mastering this inner game thing. And being able to image and kind of see yourself, and, you know, we at some point we'll talk a lot more about visualization specifically, but, like, as much as you can, you want to be seeing yourself do it. And you transfer, like, watching someone else who's, like, really good. Like, he uses an example of someone serving, like, with more power, and we'll watch someone who's got a powerful serve, and then kind of move from watching them to seeing yourself serving and feeling yourself serving powerfully. And I think, well, I know, like, if that's the approach you take to learning and improving performance, it's going to happen much sooner than kicking your own butt all the time mentally and having coaches and parents and fans or whatever letting their input dominate your mentality as well. It's just, we don't learn things that way. We don't play well that way either. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Unbound Performance Podcast.
Your support helps us continue to build our community. If you're enjoying this content, please like, subscribe, and share.